Welcome to Basic English Grammar for ESL Students, Lesson 4, Prepositions of Place, Part 2. Preposition of Place. A preposition of place can also tell you a direction. The preposition to tells you a direction. Where are they going? They are going to the store. To the store is the direction. What store are they going to? They are going to the 7-Eleven. Preposition of place, direction. What's the preposition of direction? Where is he going? He's going to the library. Do you know the preposition? Where is he coming from? He is coming from the 7-Eleven. Where is he going? Where is he coming from? Prepositions of place. Where is he working? What are the prepositions of place? He is working outside his house in the yard. Where are you making lunch? I am making lunch inside the house in the kitchen. The answer, he is. What's the question? Who is working outside his house in the yard? The answer, I am. What's the question? Who is making lunch inside the house in the kitchen? The answer is working. What's the question? What is he doing outside his house in the yard? The answer, making lunch. What's the question? What are you doing inside the house in the kitchen? The answer's lunch. What's the question? What are you making inside the house in the kitchen? Outside his house in the yard. What's the question? Where is he working? The answer, inside the house in the kitchen. What's the question? Where are you making lunch? Preposition of place. Where is he throwing the ball? He is throwing the ball against the wall. What is she doing? She is leaning. Where is she leaning? She is leaning against the wall. What is she leaning against? The wall. What's the question? What is she leaning against? What's the question? What is he throwing the ball against? What's the question? Where is he throwing the ball? The question? Where is she leaning? The question? Who is throwing the ball against the wall? What's the question? What is he doing? The question? What is she doing? What's the question? What is he throwing against the wall? The question? Who is leaning against the wall? The preposition at can also tell you a direction. Where is he throwing the ball? He's throwing the ball against the wall. He is throwing the ball at the wall. Now, read the question and try to write the answer. The question, who is throwing the ball at the wall? Try to write the answer. The answer, he is. The question, read the question. What's the answer? What is he throwing at the wall? The answer, the ball. Read the question. What's the answer? What is he doing? He is throwing the ball. The question? The answer. What is he throwing the ball at? The wall. The question? Is he throwing the ball at the wall? Yes, he is. Now, complete the sentences in past continuous. They were going to the store. He was going to the library. He was coming from the 7-Eleven. I was making lunch inside the house in the kitchen. She was leaning against the wall. Now, ask the question. The answer, the 7-Eleven. Where was he coming from? Where was he going? What was she leaning against? Who was going to the store? What were you making inside the house in the kitchen? Who was going to the library? Where were they going? Who was leaning against the wall? Where were you making lunch inside the house? Where was she leaning? What were you doing inside the house in the kitchen? What was he doing? What were they doing? What was she doing? What was he doing? Who was making lunch inside the house in the kitchen? Now, write the sentences in simple past tense. They went to the store. He came from the 7-Eleven. I made lunch inside the house in the kitchen. She leaned against the wall. Now ask the questions in simple past tense. Where did he come from? What did she lean against? Who went to the store? What did you make inside the house in the kitchen? Where did they go? Who leaned against the wall? Where did you make lunch inside the house? Where did she lean? What did you do? Who came from the 7-Eleven? What did they do? What did she do? Who made lunch inside the house in the kitchen? Present continuous. What's the missing preposition of place? George is looking at his wife, Martha. What's the question? Who is looking at his wife, Martha? What's the question? Who is George looking at? Change George to the subject pronoun. He is looking at his wife, Martha. Change his wife, Martha, to the object pronoun. He is looking at her. What's the preposition? Martha is looking at her husband, George. What's the question? Who is looking at her husband, George? What's the question? Who is Martha looking at? Change Martha to the subject pronoun. She is looking at her husband, George. Change her husband, George, to the object pronoun. She is looking at him. Read the question. Who is looking at Martha? What's the answer? George is. The question. Who is George looking at? The answer. He is looking at Martha. Who is looking at George? Martha is. Who is Martha looking at? She is looking at George. Past continuous. George was looking at his wife, Martha. Martha was looking at her husband, George. What's the question? Who was looking at his wife, Martha? What's the question? Who was George looking at? What's the question? Who was looking at her husband, George? The question. Who was Martha looking at? Read the question. Who was looking at Martha? The answer? George was. Question? Who was George looking at? He was looking at Martha. Who was looking at George? Martha was. Who was Martha looking at? She was looking at George. Past tense. George looked at Martha. Martha looked at George. What's the question? Who looked at Martha? Who looked at George? Who did George look at? Who did Martha look at? Who looked at Martha? George did. Who did George look at? He looked at Martha. Who looked at George? Martha did. Who did Martha look at? She looked at George. This is the end of Basic English Grammar for ESL Students, Lesson 4, Prepositions of Place, Part 2. Thank you for watching.